Hello, and welcome to Unsolicited Conversations with J and B.
J and B.
J and B. We're thrilled to launch this podcast where we dive into a variety of topics that resonate with both everyday business enthusiasts, healthcare professionals, or have a strong growth mindset to live, love, and listen to lay people discuss common and uncommon topics, and maybe even banter a little bit back and forth.
Sure. How's my favorite nurse practitioner doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
I'm doing well. I'm excited for our first ever podcast. And with this podcast, our goal is to create a space for open dialogue, exploring everything from practical business insights to health and wellness strategies. We believe that everyone should have access to information that can empower their personal and professional lives and have fun doing it. So with each episode, we hope to feature relaxed discussions and we'll break down complex ideas into relatable conversations for all to enjoy. As we grow, we plan to invite special guests to share their insights and experiences, adding even more depth to each discussion. We're eager to hear your feedback and see what topics spark your interest. So today, we're going to start our journey and discover what Brad has really devoted his passion to outside of his business life.
Yeah, I kind of discovered the attached book and kind of discovered different attachment styles. I thought it was fascinating. I think from a business perspective, I wish I'd have known this years ago. Because I look back on employees that used to work for me, that I've known long term, and kind of even their attachment styles. And I wish I would have known that back then to see if they were more avoidant, if they were more anxious. In terms of my relating to them and my relationship with them, I think it could have been a lot better if I'd understand how people do attach. Now, the book mostly talks about from a romantic standpoint, but it's still important whether you're dealing with family, I think friends, whether it's platonic relationships, romantic partnerships, or whatever it may be. I think attachment styles are fascinating in how it comes about.
And one thing that I have learned about this is, as a provider and nurse practitioner dealing with people every day, I try to get to know the individual, learn what is bothering them, how will they achieve that goal. And I want to always find the right person to refer them to. So whether it be a physical therapist or even if it has to be a specialist with therapy, I want to identify the right person to send them to. And reading through this, it's not really about personality, but it's how one attaches to an individual.
Right.
And then if you don't attach well with somebody or you don't have the same type of communication style,
absolutely,
it's going to be hard for you as the patient then to really relate to that therapist, and they may not connect. So I've really been thinking about this lately going, I should pay closer attention to just even terms that they use.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you think about it in romantic relationships, how much further this is exasperated. I'm saying how much further you get into it, how much further this is pronounced in terms of attachment styles. It's one thing with your practitioner, but think about with your life partner, for example.
Exactly. With all that said, let's start from the beginning and let's talk about what is attachment or attachment theory.
So let me start by saying this, that it's interesting because back in the 60s, John Bowlby his name is pronounced, I believe, who is a British psychotherapist, really concentrated on how attachment styles when we're basically born and in childhood, how that affects us all through our life and even into adult relationships and how we attach on adult relationships. So it's kind of been taken off that theory. And we have books today like this one, which is called Attached, which the author here is Amir Levine and his sidekick and friend, Rachel Heller. Both have interesting backgrounds, by the way. He's a psychiatrist and she's a psychologist by training. They both looked at childhood development. That was kind of their specialty. And so they kind of put together what you consider 4 different attachment styles and how we attach to one another. Now, everybody has an attachment style, okay? So the 4 are, just so you know, secure, which everybody should try to be and wants to be. And that's about 50% of the population. There's dismissive avoidance or avoidance, and that's about 22 to 23% of the population or so. There's also fearful avoidance, which is a smaller segment, but I think it's bigger than what we actually statistically show. And then there's the anxious preoccupied, which is around 20 to 22% as well. So these are the different attachment styles. You've got the secure and the other things I mentioned, whether you're dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, or whether you're, AP, anxious, those are all insecure attachments. So the goal is to try to move from those insecure to the secure for a more productive relationship.
Okay. And with all those, can you explain a little bit about like how the book outlined secure and then avoidant? And they just did more the 3 attachments.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, it wasn't until later
much.
they kind of get into the 4th,
Okay.
which is more the fearful. I could probably describe very briefly some of the different attachment styles and kind of the categories.
Yeah.
First of all, if you're considered a secure person, like I said, 50%, typically you're pretty grounded in yourself. You're not overly egotistical, right? You don't think more of yourself than you should, but you have self-confidence in yourself. You have boundaries that you establish in relationships that you don't have a hard time. You also have needs that you can convey. You're very comfortable within yourself. And your relationship is not all about your partner, right?
Okay.
You have things that you do outside the partnership with work. In other words, you're pretty self-fulfilled and you feel pretty good about yourself. And you don't worry constantly about your partner, what they're doing, how they're doing. Why aren't they texting me? Are they cheating? That type of thing. You're just secure within yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you're independent, yet you thoroughly enjoy one's company to be
sure.
there, and you don't
Absolutely.
worry about what they're doing. You could do your own thing, and hopefully your partner is also secure and they're doing their own thing, but you meld well together and you're able to communicate what those boundaries are or passions are.
Exactly, and needs. And that's really the ideal relationship, right? Is to have both you and your partner be secure. Because studies have shown that's kind of when you look at commitment, satisfaction, the overall health of relationship, that's where you want to be, and that's kind of the sweet spot. But unfortunately, 50% of the population is not secure, right? So we have to figure out how to deal with insecurities if we have it and what to do with it, with our own core wounds, and how to be more productive and really how to move toward a more secure attachment, if that makes sense.
Do you think that people can move from one attachment style to another attachment style, or is it always backwards where the goal is always to go to secure?
Right.
So if you've been secure, can you go into fearful avoidant, and can fearful avoidant at some point?
That is a great question. I think the reality in the research has shown that you can become more secure if you're an insecure attachment style. It takes work though. It really does. It takes work and commitment on your part. And in many regards, it does require therapy. And I'm talking consistent therapy, not I'm going to my therapist, once every quarter or once or twice a year. This is something you have to really, really work on. Because remember, when you look at attachment theory, it's based upon how we attach to our parents at a very, very young age.
Yeah.
And many times it's from birth to 18 months, how the mother attaches to the child, whether the child feels somewhat neglected at times, whether that child may feel inconsistent parenting, whether that child had trauma in their lives early on. These are all factors that kind of formulate how we attach to somebody. And this how we attach in adulthood, right?
Yeah.
So you can move, but it does require a lot of modalities within the therapeutic setting in order to be able to move in that direction. I should point out too that you can be a secure person and be with somebody who, for example, maybe they're fearful avoidant. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but they can kind of swing a little bit more to anxiousness. So there are people, and I've read case studies of people who are secure, but they struggle with a partner because that partner has an insecurity that they kind of gravitate to. You hope if you're secure, you can help that insecure person become more secure, but that's not always the case.
If these attachment styles are developed from birth to, say, 18 months, a child's life could be pretty secure at that and have a great bond with a parent, but then, say, life happens to that family and there's a stressor in the life. What does it look like then? What if the parents get a divorce, or what if a child becomes sick and there's then that impacted with strain of a chronic condition or a diagnosis, or somebody loses their job? So does that change sometimes the dynamic of?
And I think, once again, I think research has shown this to be true as well, right? This is a theory, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, but let's be honest. if a parent at a very young age goes through a difficult divorce, that child can feel neglected, abandoned. They can feel that they're part of the fault. I mean, there's a lot of emotions that go into childhood trauma. There's been cases, for example, of women who've married somebody who has under domestic violence or somebody who is narcissistic, for example. And these women struggle for 8, 10, 12 years with a narcissistic husband, even though they may have been secure and grown up in a very loving environment. The fact that narcissists actually changed them to become anxious or avoidant over the years. So there is an environmental component of this, as well as I'm sure you're interested in the biology. There is a genetic component of our anxiousness and avoidancy as well. So
yeah, I think from a genetic component, because you're always kind of anxious with your first child.
Oh, sure.
There's always that underlying, like, am I doing this right? Am I not doing this right?
Right.
And will that anxiety kind of come off on them? And is that what it's like for the first child? And then the second one, you're like, I got this. So I know how this goes. So so in my scenario, I have 2 kids, and with my daughter, I feel like I was pretty, anxious at first. And it was in the winter months. I was like, I don't want anybody to come around. I'm a little nervous about, her getting sick. What about the flu? Wash your hands. And then with my son, he was also born in the winter months. And I'm like, I don't care.
Right,
and so
right.
I feel
Yeah.
I was much more relaxed.
Yep.
And
Makes sense.
how my son is very, very much a lover and independent. But he's also just attached and secure, and I feel that's probably because I was super relaxed. With that birth of 3 to 18 months or so, do you think that really just sets the stage always?
I think early on, the studies have shown, and especially with Dr. Bowlby or John Bowlby was showing, is that there is that. I mean, at early stages. I can say, for example, if you have very inconsistent parenting, I know, for example, and I'll just talk about myself for a second, and that is I have kind of a both secure and anxious preoccupied attachment style, which is insecure and something I have to work on. But I know why from childhood. Because of my mother's, where she came from, I can tell you that I think her mothering was rather inconsistent. Also, I had a father who many times I felt abandoned by. And remember, when you're talking about somebody who's anxious, right? They have a need for closeness and intimacy. They're concerned about the world around them. They're concerned about how do I meet everybody else's needs? And they don't necessarily focus on their needs all the time. Everything's okay as long as mom and dad are okay. And if dad's not okay, it's a bad day for dad, then I got to watch out, right? So there is some of that anxiety that formulates at that as you go through life that carries it with you. And even into relationships today, you can have what they can call protest behaviors because you're trying to draw the person back in because you feel like they're abandoning you. Because the core wound for an anxious person like myself is, oh, please don't leave me. I don't want to be abandoned in a relationship, right? And we have to work on moving to a more secure position in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're kind of subconsciously, that's always there, and that's something you have to that's what you have
I have to fight that
work on
all the time. Absolutely.
Time.
All the time.
Yeah. So with that said, what is that attachment style? So we've covered secure.
Okay, that's considered.
So what is that?
So that's anxious preoccupied, called APs. They have an anxious component to them, obviously. So like I said, their core wound and what really concerns them from childhood is being abandoned. Okay. But they also have questions about, am I worthy enough? Am I good enough? What's going on in the world around me? Making sure that everybody else is settled, even though I may not be. Sometimes we don't focus and worry about our needs. We worry about other people's needs first, right? And it kind of creates anxiety in a relationship. And it kind of creates, to some degree, which is not attractive, I have to admit, for some folks, it kind of creates a little bit of neediness and clinginess, right? So if you can become clingy and needy because of you feel your partner pushing away for some unknown reason. So it's something you have to battle, and it's something you have to work on. The converse to that, I'll just share with you, would be the dismissive avoidant.
Okay.
The dismissive avoidant is one that's really had a parenting that was more neglectful. Okay. So they had to learn how to survive on their own and rely on themselves. They may not even trust their parents. They may not trust a lot of people. So trust is a big issue with these people, right? And so it's not uncommon for them to want to seek intimacy, much like an AP, but only to a certain point. I want intimacy. I crave it. But, oh, don't come too close, though. If you come too close, I feel very uncomfortable with that. And then I pull away because I need my time and my space. And I don't want to be enmeshed. I don't want to be smothered. I need my independence. And I gravitate toward that. But think about if you've got a relationship between an anxious preoccupied and a dismissive avoidant, how that looks.
Yeah, you trigger one another.
Well, you start to pull away for some unknown reason because you're deactivated, for example. Yeah. And I think as an anxious preoccupied, what the hell's going on, Jodi? Why are you pulling away from me? Why would you do that? Do you not want me? Do you not like me? Do you not desire me? Are you looking for somebody else? That type of thing. And then as an anxious preoccupied, you get involved in very maladaptive behaviors, protest behaviors. I may text you more, call you more. Drive by your house, go to your place of employment, figure out where you show up throughout the course of the day, stalk you on social media, threaten to leave the relationship. I do all sorts of maladaptive things because I'm crying out for you. Please come back.
Crying out for help.
I need tension. Please come back because I feel like you're moving away from me and I don't want you to abandon me.
The dismissive avoidant doesn't know how to communicate.
No,
those
absolutely right.
I guess requests or understand.
Yeah. And in many cases, Jodi, they're not cognizant they're even doing it, right? But they are doing it.
Because that core, I guess, attachment that they had from birth, they're like, oh, I got to protect. It's always
self-protect. It's about security and protecting thyself, right? It helps them protect themselves to be secure because they understand that I don't want somebody to get too close. I can't be too vulnerable. Vulnerability equals unsecure results. It's a downfall in relationships. I've been disappointed over and over again when I've given too much of myself, been too vulnerable, and allowed people to get too close. Therefore, I let you get close to a certain point, and then I'm going to pull away from my own safety and security. Yeah.
Okay. And then what is the fourth attachment?
So the other one, the last one, which God bless them, I really have a soft spot in my heart for these folks, is called the fearful-avoidants, right? And there's about 5 to 7%, I don't know, maybe a little higher from stuff I've read. And these are folks that really have a tough attachment style. And that is they both have the anxious part of it, the fearful anxious part of it, that an AP can have, fear of betrayal and even abandonment. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm broken. To the avoidance side, which says, I need my space. I need my time. Do not enmesh me. Do not get too close to me. Do not, I need my independence. And they battle this in a pendulum swing back and forth. It could be hourly. It could be daily, weekly, monthly. And they could be stuck in this position, being activated and deactivated until they re-regulate themselves for a period of time that's very confusing for them. Think about their partner, though, when you have to date somebody or married to somebody like that, who's constantly swinging back and forth. You don't really understand what you're going to get.
That would be definitely anxiety provoking.
Well, it can be. And that's why I was talking about even secure people who date fearful avoidance can move to anxiety because of the attachment style of their partner.
Yeah. Oh. It's interesting how, reading into this a little bit more, I don't personally think about this.
Yeah.
But then I've been thinking about this and I'm like, man, what type of style am I? And you can be two different,
Let me guess, okay? Because I'm actually getting fairly good at it, right? And I've known you, I don't know you a great deal, but I know you a little bit. Obviously, I see you as very secure, just in our interactions. But if anything, you don't lean anxious to me, you would probably lean more avoidant.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm definitely, I think, avoidant because, my dad was diagnosed with cancer when I was 9. And I think I remember I've got to self-protect.
Okay, that's exactly right.
And a lot of it was, I remember my grandparents saying, oh, we can't tell the kids the C word. And I was, and this was long before the internet was out. So it's not like I could just go to my phone and there was no such thing as a cell phone at that time. That time to say what's the C word? But I had heard it because my grandfather had died of cancer.
Oh, okay.
Prior when I was 5, and I was in the hospital with him. So I knew that it was cancer. And I'm like, well, why don't we communicate about these things? And so I think attachment styles have definitely varied through the years, generationally, because when I was growing up, things were definitely behind closed doors. You only talked to certain people. You didn't talk to a lot of people. You didn't openly communicate about relationships
Or you weren't
or your marriage.
You weren't vulnerable, let's be honest. Right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I get
so I remember thinking the whole time, well, I've got to ask. And I was the one to always ask the questions. Well, what is this? Where is Dad? What are we going to do?
Right.
Are we going to the hospital? Like we showed up at the hospital and I demanded to go into the ICU, but I'm 9 years old. I'm not tall enough. And so I was like, well, somebody give me some heels and I'm going to walk into the ICU. And it was from that moment on, like I then became also a caregiver. You know, I was a caregiver and I had to be independent.
Absolutely. And I think that independence probably carried over into adulthood, right? And maybe even to your relationships that you've had. Either with your current husband now and even prior, relationships you've had with other men. I think I can see where that probably carried over there too. Can you see that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, my husband's a saint because I can definitely be avoidant. Yeah. I think there's an anxious component, but I think that's anxious in a different way.
Yeah, so
life, stress.
You don't confuse anxiety and avoidancy with not being secure, because there are secure people that will feel anxious at times normally, right? You're waiting for lab results to come back. You're kind of anxious, even though you're secure. And there's times when we all need space, and there's the avoidancy part of us, but that's natural. What I'm talking about are attachment styles that definitely put you in this category. And do keep in mind that this category has a spectrum. In other words, there's some people that are mild or slightly avoidant, and some people are so avoidant, it is incredible. As I read through some of the stories on Reddit and YouTube comments, thousands and thousands I've read. Yeah. And the common theme for example, an avoidant, the partner, the one word I can tell you right now is lonely. These people are lonely because their partner pulls away a lot of the time. They don't know when they're coming back, and it's just a very, very difficult attachment to be married to, for example, in a partnership with, because these people are gone a lot. If they're not physically gone, they're emotionally gone. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see that because you do definitely want your space and independence. Do you think that professionalism, like say, for instance, in your career as a business, I'm in the healthcare career, and as an NP, I feel like I'm a little bit different when it comes to how I am professionally in building programs versus like romantic relationships.
Yeah, I think
you see different attachment styles?
I do, just because, you can kind of allow yourself to be vulnerable with your romantic partner. Hopefully there's intimacy that you don't expect, obviously, in business with the people.
Yeah. You hope not.
You hope not. Exactly. Get yourself in trouble. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's more of a tight bonded connection with your partner. Where in business, you know that you have to protect your business. You have to protect the people that work for you. And from my standpoint, when I was a business owner, I was very cognizant of my responsibilities. So I took on, I think I was rather secure because I had to be, because I had people who relied on me.
Exactly.
And it didn't involve me being, like I said, feeling a bonding with these people on a very, close level like you would with your partner.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you think as the anxious preoccupied, that doesn't play out in the business side at all?
Well, I could see it. I actually saw with some employees, right? Okay. Once you begin to understand their attachment after the mask comes off and after you've worked with them for several years, you can see how they become very anxious about certain things. And certain things, I know the therapy world loves to use the word trigger, but some things trigger them or activate them. And I can see that. I can recall in my mind several employees who were anxious and how they got activated or triggered. And I can see some employees who got avoidant and kind of pulled back and didn't want to do things because of the fear or the wounds that they had, maybe that they carried with them throughout their entire lives. Yeah. So I can see even in the business world where some of the attachment things do affect how they perform in the workplace.
That's interesting. Do you think that as a business owner, then their boss, that by you understanding their attachment styles, that made you a better boss because you knew how to communicate better? Because it really does come down in how you communicate.
I wish I could do it again, Jodi. I mean, from that regard, right? I didn't do it well at times because I didn't understand everybody's different attachment styles. And I didn't understand how I could probably understand their core wounds and how I could help maybe motivate them or be there for them, or what I could do for them as an employer that I probably wasn't able to do because I didn't understand where they were coming from. Yeah. That makes sense.
And I think that's what I love about our podcast and what we're talking about is we're two individuals that we're not experts in
No.
this field.
No.
But you were an expert business owner, and then as a healthcare provider, like I have to build
Right.
relationships with patients.
Right.
Like these kind of conversations are not what you have
No.
on a day-to-day basis,
No.
and not something that I would have
Was never
looked-
really taught. Even business school, you're not taught this.
You're not taught this. But it makes you, I feel like it's going to make me a better provider by getting to know, like I will see it and look into it a little bit more, and I'll know maybe some people that do have these issues. I mean, that we hear stories every day of, past traumas. I work in the sleep world, so it's largely behavioral health.
Yep.
And there's a lot of past traumas, and I'm like, well, I don't want to say something to trigger them in any way.
Right.
Because I know that with sleep, when we sleep, and one of our favorite authors, Matthew Walker, wrote
love
the
him.
book, Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep, yeah. It's a great
And
book. Great book.
why sleep is so important, I guess, in maybe channeling and getting to the subconscious and helping us heal from if we're, dismissive avoidance
Right.
or fearful avoidance, how sleep would really impact how we attach in the future, or getting to the subconscious and kind of understanding that. Because when we sleep and we're on good sleep hygiene, our mind and body is much more relaxed. Where, how I inform people when we do sleep, we're getting rid of the bad cells and we're committing the good memories to memories. So kind of getting rid of those past traumas if it was something.
And quite frankly,
us.
when you take a look at it, especially in the studies have shown for fearful avoidance, go back to that, it's not uncommon for them to have past trauma that causes them to be fearful avoidant, where there's a lot of chaos, for example, in their childhood, a lot of confusion. They may have had, like I said, either a father who was an alcoholic, so you weren't sure what was going to happen, whether dad's going to beat the heck out of you or he's going to give you a hug. So you really had some dynamics there that are tough in childhood to deal with. And these traumas are manifest themselves in really attachment in the way we attach as adults too. But I think we need to keep in mind too that these are not personality. They're not personality disorders, right? They're not cluster B disorders. These are attachment styles, right?
Yeah.
But it has a major effect on how we relate to each other. I'll give you another example I think is very relevant. So my sister adopted a baby boy from Romania. Okay, this baby boy was in a nursery, was never touched, held, or coddled unless they had to be changed or fed. That was the only time. Self-soothed, self-cried, and everything. This poor young man has had one hell of a time with attachment disorders throughout his entire life. Why? Because of childhood.
All because of childhood.
All because of childhood. And I can't help wonder, what would the kid really be like today if he'd have been in a healthy, loving home? And, my sister and brother-in-law have kind of felt the brunt of this because they've had to really work with this child and with a lot of therapy to help him adapt in life.
Yeah. And I think that that's one thing, I grew up with, you don't go to therapy unless you're literally crazy. And so I think one thing, if I can't say it enough, therapy is important. It's a way to
absolutely
communicate your wants, your needs in an unbiased fashion, and meet with somebody who can really help you talk through the process of whatever it is that's bothering you. But it could ultimately be all stem from this.
Oh, a lot of it is.
Addiction. Addiction is one of the things that, some people who are very well versed in attachment.
Tyus Gibson.
Yeah. She was talking about how when she was 15, addicted to opioids, and how she was able to get through that and get over that addiction was she had to lean into therapy and understand what her childhood trauma was, and at the subconscious level, to be able to understand why she had that addiction.
That's why, and I agree, that's why if you have an insecure attachment style, Jodi, I would say that everybody who does should probably be in therapy, honestly, because they're never going to get the relationship that they truly want and deserve in life unless they can move to a secure attachment style. They'll always be stuck in insecurities that will limit their ability to attach to somebody in an intimate way, a loving way, and have a relationship that they truly desire.
Yeah. And they have to understand that that's what it's coming from.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think the only way is, I guess, educating yourself, but talking to a therapist. And know that therapy is important for anybody.
Yeah.
I think therapy is really, truly important for anybody.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I really, therapists do wonderful things out there, and really, the good ones really, really help people have better lives.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about reflection. Do you feel like everybody should do a test to identify like what type of attachment they're in, or what type of attachment style they have, and at when do we start having these conversations? Because this is not something that was ever like I said, brought to my attention. And like, how do you talk about this with your kids or your spouse?
We're getting outside of what Brad's read and into what Brad thinks, which could be a dangerous world to enter.
Maybe you should take a drink of that whiskey.
So my personal philosophy is that this book, Attached, for example, should be required of every high school reading.
Okay.
Believe it or not. Why? Because I think it's important that kids at a young age understand attachment and what they are. And when they begin to date somebody, to understand what they are as well. I think it's important you understand what you're getting involved with, understand your partner's core wounds, understand what may be happening, to your partner and what's happening to you along the way. I don't think you understand yourself that well until you understand your own attachment style, right? Yeah. So, and I actually believe, and I have no evidence to prove this, but I wonder if we couldn't cut down on divorce rates if people understood their attachment styles better and their core wounds and how to help their partner, not fix their partner. I didn't say that. I said support and help their partner along the way. I wonder if we could not cut, divorce rate down by having everybody understand a little bit more about themselves and their partner.
Absolutely, yes. But I think just understanding and knowing yourself.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think enough of us truly know ourselves deep down, because we've always maybe been taught like you have to take care of that person. You have to understand how to do everything outside, and you've never focused on yourself.
Sure.
And teaching that at a young, I try to teach that to my kids at a young age, that your inner happiness is made by you, not something externally, not something found on social media.
And that's what you're talking about is a secure attachment style person, right? Right. And what you're saying, I wholeheartedly agree, but insecure people don't have that. Yeah.
And so, starting these conversations early and making people aware, like our job in life, I think in anything, in business and in health and wellness, that's the biggest social media platform, is creating awareness.
Right.
And this is an opportunity. Podcasts are a great way to create
I think
awareness.
You and I are creating awareness in what we're doing now.
In what we're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And just at least opening that conversation. It may not be the most intelligent conversation, but it is.
Whiskey
we're lay.
A little bit of Maker's Mark helps.
We're lay individuals having this conversation and learning along the way. And hopefully, and I think having fun at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the common misconceptions people have about attachment styles and how they affect relationships?
I think first of all, I probably think, and this is from reading a lot of comments, right? Is that people wrongly assume because of your attachment style. Let's say, for example, and I would read this, my FA, which is fearful-avoidant spouse, just dumped me, and obviously has BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. No, that's a personality disorder that has to be diagnosed by a clinician, right? This is attachment. Granted, you can have fearful-avoidant tendencies, which look like BPD, but it's not the same. So we automatically assume that attachment person has a personality disorder. For example, somebody who's avoidant, we think because of the way they avoid and step back and they can become aloof and they become distant, we think they're narcissistic and they have narcissistic personality disorder. That is not necessarily the truth. Okay. The fact is that's a personality disorder. This is an attachment. So sometimes we cross.
We can kind of blur those lines.
And that's really that's not fair, right? And it's not. So everybody has an attachment style. Yeah. So obviously, whether you suffer from borderline or narcissism, you've got an attachment, right?
And in medicine, you have to have a diagnosis.
Yep.
So that could be a little bit where lines are blurred.
Yep.
And a misunderstanding in how I think things are maybe treated or understood. Because once, say you get that diagnosis, and it could all just be something related to attachment. And
Right.
then...
Yeah. I look at it like this. So for a type 1 diabetic, right, they didn't get that disease state. You know, they didn't do anything to deserve that or
Right.
get that, right? It's not like type 2. But they still have to monitor their glucose and their insulin to make sure they stay within therapeutic range. Otherwise, there's health consequences with it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I would say this. If you have an insecure attachment style, that's not your fault, right? But I think we all have an obligation at some form in our relationships to try to do something about it and to work on it, right? Because it's not an excuse to say I have it, but I'm not going to do anything with it. Because there's one thing I've learned in the research I've done on this is hurt people hurt people. And there was so much pain conveyed in comments about insecure people deeply hurting people.
Yeah.
And an insecure person hurting another insecure person. And sometimes they don't recognize it or realize it. So I think it's incumbent upon us to work on ourselves, just like a diabetic must monitor themselves to be healthy.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Is really good. I think it comes down to when we're in this world now of longevity and how do we optimize our health and health optimization. I think this really comes down to how do you fully optimize your health and understanding you and everything you're made of, from the cellular level to the mental health level.
Right.
In every aspect is really what's important. Because
Sure.
if you don't know you, it is really hard to understand and then move from there. Like if we're just talking about attachment.
Yep.
If we don't know
Right.
how we change every day in how we, respond to something.
Right.
We don't really know ourselves, and that is probably the number one thing that you should focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you should focus on yourself first, and then if you can, try to encourage your partner to do the same. Because the reality is this: if I'm insecure and I'm working on my insecurities and I'm working with a therapist on a consistent basis, but my partner's not, yeah, good luck with that.
The problems are still going to be there.
It's still going to be there, and it's not going to go away. Both partners have to agree, if they're insecure, that this is something they have to work on consistently with a therapist. And I also see a red flag. If I'm going to a therapist and you're going to a therapist, it's a team approach. In other words, you kind of talk to me about what your therapist is talking about and working with you. I tell you. So if I'm not willing to communicate what my therapist says to you, that's probably not a good thing. We need to be able to communicate with each other on this issue.
Because you have to be able to communicate.
Right, absolutely.
Communication is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think insecure people want?
Well, here's the issue as I see it, and I've come to this conclusion myself, and I don't know if it's correct or not, but the reality is what insecure people want in relationships is what they're not willing to give. So let me give you an example. So you are fearful avoidant and I'm anxious preoccupied. So if you're fearful avoidant, you may say things like, I want in this relationship, by the way, you have a hard time communicating your needs because you're fearful avoidant. You have a hard time with boundaries and you have a hard time with vulnerability. But if you get there with me and you say, I need love, what does that mean? I mean, you've got to be able to communicate what that means.
You got to be able to understand
and you say,
relay that.
I don't want to be betrayed. I want a secure relationship. I want safety, and that's important for women. I want congruency. In other words, what I say is what I do, and what I do is what I say. I want consistency in communication. I want to feel like that you're not going to betray me, you're not going to cheat on me, you're not going to lie to me. It's all the things we all want, even secure people. But the reality is, think about this for a second. If you're an FA, fearful avoidant, and you're in your pull away phase, avoidant phase, and I'm an AP, what do I think? I'm thinking, can I trust you?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I don't know if I can trust you. I'm thinking, this doesn't feel very secure to me. And by the way, your communication is not consistent and it's not congruent, right?
Yeah.
So the things that you want from me and your partner, you don't give. So that's the problem with insecure styles, is we've got to fix that in relationships to give what we want and what we give. And so basically, you're able to ask for it and you're able to give it as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's just a matter of, I think, when you go to therapy, you learn tools on how to communicate.
Right.
But then you have to take those tools that you're learning with your therapist, if you're a spouse or
Right.
significant other, or whatever you're going to therapy for. Maybe it's a relationship with a parent.
Right.
But in this case, if it's a romantic relationship, you need to take that tool home.
Exactly.
And like you said, they both have to be working on.
Yep. Yeah, it's just
There.
otherwise. I'm going to tell you, it's futile. I mean, this doesn't really go anywhere in the relationship. Here's the thing: you've got FAs in relationship with FAs. You've got DAs in relationship with DAs, and it's insecure relationship all the time. But the point I want to make is that you can be with that person long term, but the value of the relationship, what you want from a relationship, the depth of the love and intimacy, what relationships are supposed to provide, you will never ever get unless you achieve more of a secure position with each other. Otherwise, it's a game of cat and mouse. And it's a difficult position to be in. It's a difficult relation to maintain. And quite frankly, you never in your entire life will experience what healthy romantic relationships are supposed to look like.
Right. You know, there's kids that are factored in and life that factors in that makes stress levels different, and then your communication.
Yep. It's all about communication though, right?
But I think the key takeaway, that's where I was going, is communication.
I agree. Yeah.
It's hard though when you are not a secure person if to communicate, or if you are fearful avoidant, you will back away and you may communicate some things but not all things, or expect them to read your mind because, well, I mean, you've been married for 25 or 24 years, so you should know that I'm backing away and why.
So avoidants think that all the time, Jodi. It's interesting. They think people are mind readers, and they're not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've lived in the same household, you should know me.
Yeah.
By now.
Yeah. Maybe I should, but I don't.
Right. So I think this is going to be a great discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Jodi. I appreciate it.
And probably more to come on this, I would say.
I'm hoping as we continue to move forward, it'll be fun, exciting, and hopefully people were able to listen and enjoyed something about it.
I hope so too.
Yeah. You're good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Brad.
You bet.
Unsolicited Conversations. Here we go.
Thanks, guys. Oh, by the way, I should say that if you liked it, please leave a comment, subscribe, and like. We'd love to hear from you on how we can make it better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to make these final comments so everybody understands. Jodi and I are not in the mental health arena. We're not trained mental health professionals. Jodi's a nurse practitioner, but neither one of us have licenses in mental health. If you want more information about your attachment style, take a quiz online. You can do that, and certainly look at the YouTube videos. There's some great therapists online that talk about different attachment styles. They go into great depth, and they have resources that can help you. What Jodi and I are trying to do is just merely have a topic we find interesting and discuss it, and hopefully you find interesting, and maybe you'll search more about it, and maybe it'll help you. Because remember, if you take the time to help yourself, educate yourself, and try to be better, that's going to help your relationships overall in all facets of life. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you.